perfect peace with your past,
Peace.
which means, just to unpack it a little, it means you've done the long walk of repair. It's not a weekend workshop that gets you to perfect peace with your past. It's a willingness to show up over and over and over to slowly unravel the onion of your life. That's not a great metaphor, but I think it's a willingness to be on a path of development, a lifelong learning, a lifelong healing, and to have the humility to generously show up to support others in that path. It's a, we heal together. It does take a village and it does take time, but the possibility that perfect peace is possible.
The word grace is a word that I
Mm.
love,
Wow.
and I try, I'll say I try, I don't always succeed to pour grace into the parts of me that are still
Mm.
a finished draft of who I want to
Mm.
become, but
Mm.
also to extend grace to
Mm.
others when we
Mm.
see the wounded 7-year-old
Mm.
calling the shots for them. Welcome to the Live Brave podcast. I'm Margie Worrell. Here you'll learn how to live and lead with more courage in an increasingly anxious world. If you'd love to bring your bravest self to your biggest challenges and the boldest vision for your life, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Live Brave podcast. I am so happy that you will be with me for today's conversation with a woman who I feel incredibly blessed to have met over the last 12, 18 months. Her name is Amy Elizabeth Fox. She is the co-founder of Mobius Executive Leadership that does extraordinarily important, deep, transformative work with leaders in organizations around the world. And I've had the joy of being part of the work that they're doing to help those who hold positions of incredible responsibility become the fullest, highest expression of themselves and just magnify the good that they can do. And Amy has recently written this awesome book called Leading in Chaos with Nicholas Janni. And I can't overstate how much I've enjoyed reading this book. It's going to be one I'll return to many times. We're going to talk about numerous things today, but the key thing that has drawn me to Amy and her work is how it is focused on helping us, one, wake up to the gifts within us and to what makes us feel most alive, but also to heal those parts of us that have wounds from our childhoods. All of us carry into our adult lives something from our childhood. We are both gifted and wounded by our childhoods, as Paul Bunyan has said, and the giftedness sometimes gets blanketed over by the wounds. And so in our conversation today, you are going to hear a lot of wisdom from someone who has worked with some of the smartest, most accomplished people on the planet, who also, to quote what Amy said, are sitting on a fabric of uncried tears. And so I know you'll enjoy this conversation. I hope it touches you deeply. I hope it helps you connect to that part within you that is just deeply seeking to live your most meaningful, fulfilling, purposeful life, your most loving life, and to just take a look at where you need to go and sit under a tree, maybe write a letter to yourself, maybe go out and just connect in a deeper, more authentic way with someone that you wouldn't usually speak to. Because we as a human race are all connected by invisible threads. And when we can open up our own hearts, it enables us to connect more deeply with others, to be a greater force for good wherever we live and work, and ultimately to help the whole of humanity. I know that's a lofty thing, but to help the whole of humanity move forward. Enjoy our conversation and get yourself a copy of Leading in Chaos. I cannot recommend it highly enough, and there will be a link in the show notes. Well, Amy, it is wonderful having you with me today.
Thank you so much, Margie. I'm so thrilled to be with you.
I got this book. It came out just a couple days ago. I ordered several copies, and Leading in Chaos, honestly, it is very rare that I get a book, Amy, and I am underlining and highlighting and circling, and I have done it with this book, and I've only just had it a couple of days. So I know it's going to end up very dog-eared in the years ahead, but congratulations on it. And I'm honored to just talk to you today because there is so much wisdom in this book that the world needs right now. I think it's always needed this wisdom, but it feels like we have reached another moment in humankind history that it's even more pressing. And so I just want to ask you, what inspired you to team up with Nicholas Janni and write this book?
Very much what you're pointing to, Margie, which is Nicholas and I have been working with uh, senior executives with top teams, leading leadership programs for 20 years. And we have always felt, I think, a conviction that the inner life of the leader was the most important lever for transformational change inside of organizations. But the reason we felt the need to harvest our wisdom at this juncture is the level of accelerating pace of change and the destabilization that we're seeing not only in corporate life, but in geopolitical life, in ecological life. I think we've reached a moment where the old operating system of linearity, of operating from the head up, of predictable strategy, of command and control styles of leadership have just reached the tipping point where they no longer serve us. And I think it's an incredibly poignant and in some ways heartbreaking time, but it's also a time of tremendous porousness and receptivity, and therefore pregnant with fresh possibilities because I think people are at the threshold of exhaustion and overwhelm and disorientation that anybody can handle.
Yeah, no, I see it. You see it. We're all seeing it all the time. People who, the level of collective dysregulation, just people feeling that beyond a point of just, I've got a lot on, just to
That's
how do
right.
I navigate what's coming at me. You quoted Thomas Hubel, who I know has been your teacher for a long time, and you introduced me to Thomas, and I have so enjoyed learning from his deep wisdom. And you cited something he said that I had one of those, I love that. You talked about humility is the willingness to occupy the right size that life asks of you.
Yes. It's gorgeous. I mean, Thomas, as you say, Margie, has been one of my profound teachers for the last 15 years, and I now have the joy and privilege of collaborating with him on a regular basis. And what I think he's pointing to there is that many of us have been taught that embodying humility means hiding our light and dimming us down and not occupying too big a space. And arrogance is, of course, that kind of self orientation and grandiosity is toxic. But the diminution of our own gifts and our own life spark is equally toxic.
Mhm.
Um, and what life really needs now is all of us to step up to a courageous threshold of being willing to occupy our full soul light, our full gifts, our full radicality of vision, and to inspire each other to our highest. Because it's a very treacherous moment, it's a very fragile moment, and life can't afford for us to be playing small anymore.
No, well, you mentioned the word courageous threshold a moment ago. And I think this is where so much of what I've loved in your work generally, but obviously just packed into this book is the deep, deep need in all of us to start with ourselves and looking into those parts of ourselves that honestly we would rather not look at. We don't want to shine a light on them because it's easier in the moment to armor up, defend, to bury, to numb, all of these strategies, to busy ourselves, to posture, over control, over function. The list goes on. And when I think about humility, I think about clients I've had over the years. And I had one a year or two ago. She was taking on a very senior role, and there was a brand new CEO, and she said, "Oh, everyone is so just beating their chests, and I'm so not like that. I'm someone who puts my head down and gets the job done." And I said, "But if you were living your purpose," and we talk a lot about purpose, and
Beautiful.
actually you would not be just putting your head down. You would make sure that you are really holding your power and position.
Mm.
I think sometimes our fear drives us hide behind this idea of humility because it spares us the discomfort of stepping fully into our
Yeah.
light, to our
Yeah.
soul purpose.
Yeah. That's beautiful what you said. I want to pick up on a couple of themes that you mentioned, if I could, Margie. First of all, you said we have a tendency to want to avoid what's painful. And that's true. As a society, we've rejected the harsher side of emotional terrain. So we try to avoid grief or fear or hurt or sadness or loneliness. On the other hand, all those emotions are hardwired into the human operating system, and it isn't possible to avoid them, especially if you're thrusting yourself into life and letting life permeate you and touch you. So we then have to put in place practices of numbing. And those numbing mechanisms are hacks on our emotional self contact that we all kind of collude in and agree in are normal, whether it's overwork, you mentioned several of them, exhaustion, caretaking, social media saturation, busyness, having no white space in which you could feel yourself. And we've further created workplaces that tell us that our emotions are not welcome and that there's a big split between our private lives and our professional lives, which I am completely convinced is an unnecessary, unhealthy, and false bifurcation. When I bring groups of colleagues together and I invite them to share the journey of their lives or the things that worry them or the things they long for or make requests for emotional connection, they naturally melt those walls and relievingly share their interiority and relievingly and generously support each other in their journeys. You don't have to teach people how to care. You don't have to teach people how to be in a community. You just have to systematically debunk or remove the organizational myths that keep us functioning behind walls. You mentioned one other thing that I think is important, which is why does it matter now? Because when you add stress to a system that is already frozen or numbed, you provoke it into unhealthy reactions. A nervous system under stress will become hyper aroused and aggressive and rigid in its thinking and domineering, or hypo aroused, which is shut down, withdrawn, um, unfeeling. And both of those states are bad for perceiving with clarity the situation, for thinking creatively about the solution, and for imagining the future that we all feel so urgently has to be beckoned now.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think I know obviously the work that Mobius does, and I'm so delighted to be part of, the work that is being done with leaders around the world is helping to just raise that awareness. First the awakening before the healing, but just even taking a look at that internal tug of war, which takes up so much of our psychic energy. And I've had it myself, where there's this part of you that wants to be a force for good and step into your power and be deeply authentic. And another part that says, just button down and be careful what will people say and to really protect ourselves. And you wrote that so often leaders will come into Mobius programs with a cloak over that internal. I always think of it as a tug of war, wrestling match. We have these inner forces within us. And talk to me about how you feel or what you've seen in terms of what gives leaders access to that, but also allowing them to engage the body, that somatic wisdom, because so often stuff's hidden in our tissues.
Yeah, that's a very insightful comment. It's absolutely true. All our memories, unconscious sensations, history live in our soma. And one of the reasons that we're such an addicted society is because if we aren't purposefully denuding our emotional life, they will naturally arise for our attention. And that tug of war, I think, is a painful a distraction from what could otherwise be the free flow of corporate intimacy that would naturally arise from people if they didn't feel beholden to operate from the neck up, which is how most organizational cultures live. And my sister Erica Ariel Fox and I have founded this firm, which for 20 years has created immersive leadership programs that are microcosms of another possibility. So not only do they offer an opportunity for a leader to turn towards their inner life and really look at and investigate what are the root causes of some of their most longitudinal hurts and fears and executive derailers, and to address them at their core so that you can liberate a much wider range of movement and choice and hope, but also to reintegrate the poetics and the body and spirit into corporate life. So in our programs, we have cellists, we have painters, we do martial arts practice. We ask people to spend time in nature to reactivate the world of inspiration and imagination and beauty and wonder as corporate competencies. Because if you want to ensure that you're innovating and on the cutting edge of what's possible, especially at a kaleidoscope moment when the picture is changing so wildly on a daily basis and the adaptive demand is so intense and the speed of change is accelerating, people need not only deep inner stillness and ground from which to make good choices, they need the community or the commons of a group of peers who can operate in a field of coherence and collective intelligence in order to discern what's happening and to together align on what to do.
Yeah. You talked a moment ago about the spirit aspect of it.
Mm, mm.
And I think about generally the corporate world that I entered 30 something years ago. You didn't talk. I mean, it was get the job. You get the job done. I remember when Daniel Goleman came out with emotional intelligence, it's like, whoa, emotions. Whoa, we're not going to talk about emotions. That was like, whew, okay, that's kind of bold. And that's now entered the lexicon, and we all recognize we are innately emotional creatures. We emote, we reason. But I think there's this growing recognition of the spiritual dimension of our lives that transcends the religious. It is really that life force, that universal intelligence that you've spoken about so often. And I feel there is so much wisdom and so much courage and so much possibility that can emerge when we cultivate our connection to that within us and with those around us. What's your observation of a growing consciousness of that?
First of all, let me honor my dear friend of 40 years, Danny Goleman, for his extremely seminal contribution to widening the lens of how important it was to have emotional intelligence in the workplace. And I think 10 years from now, it will be equally impossible to think of a workplace that isn't activating spiritual intelligence among its senior leaders, in part because it requires a kind of path of inner activation and development to demonstrate reliably the qualities of character maturity. You have to cultivate something of a sense of connection to all of life in order to care about the commons and to be oriented towards social responsibility and ecological stewardship. You have to cultivate a quality of compassion in order to really receive multiple voices at your table and be astute to the fact that people have lived very diverse lives and come from very different family and ancestral and collective trauma that they bring into the workplace, and that we have to become increasingly capable of holding that, of witnessing that, of honoring that, and of making a restorative impulse towards that. There's also just the sense of purpose, as you said. You know, people want to be lit up with their vocation. They want to feel like they're contributing to the future. They want to be called into their highest and most potent expression. And all of that I think of as spiritual intelligence. You know, we talk about it in the common parlance, like I had an aha experience, or I was in a flow state during that moment, or I had a gut sense. You know, all that imaginal and intuitive intelligence, somatic intelligence, is spiritual intelligence. It comes from having a connection of a felt sense of the unity of life and to be part of that, and a willingness to live in not so much an autonomous and self-reliant life, but an interdependent life, and with something more subtle than just the human family, but really an ecocentric life.
Yeah, you touched on a moment ago the trauma, ancestral trauma, family trauma, collective trauma. There's on many planes, and everyone has some experience of it, whether they're aware of it or not. Talk to me a little bit about what you've come to see in terms of the childhood experiences of people who are often extremely ambitious, driven. I think of the insecure overachiever. There's something in them that drives them, and they obviously bring incredible intelligence, and they reach these high echelons. And they have all of the external, well, many of the external things propping up that identity of who they are. And yet the unresolved within them can so often not only trip them up and keep them from really making their highest point of contribution, but also create a lot of suffering for others. What have you observed in terms of the recognition of that?
It's a very dimensional question you asked. It's beautiful. I would say, first of all, let's debunk the word trauma, which some people find really scary.
Hmm.
What we mean by trauma is any experience that at the moment of the event was overly saturating emotionally. You didn't have the bandwidth to process it at the time. So a part of you moves into a kind of frozen state in order to cope with what is otherwise an overwhelming experience. And those frozen facets of the psyche walk with you until they get unfrozen. I had a beautiful conversation with a leader who had just finished my program, and he said to me on Friday, "Thank you for helping me cry the tears I've walked with for 63 years." And I teared up because it was so poignant and so beautiful. But it points to that we are walking around on a cultural fabric in which we're sitting on uncried tears. And that literally is as if you have certain part of your RAM or operating system or brain is fully occupied trying to suppress the memories, sensations, and emotions of that frozen moment. And you therefore have less access to your multifaceted intelligence, to your creativity, to your open-heartedness and connection, to your sense of life force moving through you, because part of you is still back there.
Yeah.
And what we've learned is, I mean, I've conducted thousands of trauma screenings for very successful, very senior leaders, and everyone has some story, whether they personally would call it trauma or not. They have some story, either in their own story, they had an alcoholic parent, their family, God forbid, lost a child, they lived in poverty, and they had existential insecurity all their life. They got sent at a very young age to boarding school, and or their parents were impaired by being raised in a generation after World War II, and the parents didn't receive the kind of holding and attachment and attunement that one needs to thrive in childhood. So they start to become numb themselves, and then they don't have love and affection to offer. So you have a family that operates in a fairly estranged way, where affection is not communicated and support is not communicated and a sense of interwoven safety is not communicated. So all of these things then become an impetus for a child to start getting very successful and take control of the family situation, because the parents aren't capable of playing a proper function. So what happens is the child gets parentified early on and moves into action, starts succeeding at school, starts cooking meals, taking care of the homework of the kids, taking care of their parents, operating as if they are the captain of the ship. And that is a phenomenal training for being a leader in a collective context. Those people go on to excel at school. They go on to get incredible jobs. They go on to be the breadwinner of their families. They get prestigious role after prestigious role. But at some point, as you're poignantly pointing out, Margie, they hit a wall of all that external reference, and they start to realize that they're operating from childhood survival strategies, which were brilliant at the time they were put in place. They were life-saving, but they don't need them now. They're much more resourced. They have much more freedom of movement. They have much more intelligence. They have much more life experience. They have a whole infrastructure of love and support. So there's some point at which there is a point of choice where you can actually go back and integrate those early experiences, particularly in the presence of somebody who's skilled to unfold that with you and to witness you in that and to help you integrate it. And then it's as if the past kind of comes to a rest. and the person is freed up to make choices based on their interior, on their gifts, on their values, on their aspirations, on what really matters to them, on what they thrive in. And that's a much different life. It's a life we would wish for anybody is a
Yeah.
life that has that level of healing. Um, and I think we're at a point in society where the collective pain is such that people are going to start to realize that it's worth the investment of time and it's worth the risk of some difficult passage through some uncomfortable feelings in order to reclaim the birthright of a right to be here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as you know, I wrote this book, The Courage Gap, last year, and
Yeah.
how there's often a gap between what we can do, what we know we should do, and what we do, between who we are and who we want to be. And fear sits in that gap in some form, and
Yes.
often that is born from those experiences. But when we can access our willingness to feel everything, it liberates us because it just expands what's possible. And so often we are afraid of feeling our feelings fully. There's this almost a phobia. I don't want to feel that. And your phrasing, your language, that we're sitting on a fabric of uncried tears. That's poetic. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge that. It's your way with words. But just to feel that which we haven't let us feel can open up the other side of that, is just everything.
Yeah, and I wanna another thing that I heard Thomas say over the years that I find very poignant and it points to the importance of why this matters above and beyond personal restoration and healing. He said, "Not until you're at perfect peace with your past can you virgin birth the part of the future you came to gift life." And he linked for me so explicitly the inner journey of wholeness with the ability to induct the future. And I believe that if we want to start to build a new operating system, a new way of leading, a new way of working together, a new way of inhabiting the planet, we have to be able to have a different quality of intimacy with ourselves, with each other, and with the numinous. And in that field of generative mist, of mystical presence, of subtle beauty, of gossamer connection and community, I'm very, very hopeful that we can start to realign the fabric of life.
I kind of I know I'm gonna go back through this podcast, Amy, and
Oh,
do it again because
that
you
was very generous.
things which were just like, oh, I
Mm.
wanted to sit with that scent, that thought. It's so beautiful. But what you had said about Thomas, that it's not until we have made peace. Like, can you just tell me? It's not until we've made peace with
Well, he said something very specific, which really riveted me. He said, perfect peace with your path.
peace.
Which means, just to unpack it a little, it means you've done the long walk of repair. It's not a weekend workshop that gets you to perfect peace with your past. It's a willingness to show up over and over and over to slowly unravel the onion of your life. That's not a great metaphor, but I think it's a willingness to be on a path of development, a lifelong learning, a lifelong healing, and to have the humility to generously show up to support others in that path. It's a we heal together. It does take a village and it does take time, but the possibility that perfect peace is possible. And I think perfect peace, if I would say one thing further, isn't just reconciliation with my own life experience. It's doing the work to take accountability for what my ancestors colluded in that was violent and destructive. And it's being willing to help honor and bow down to what my ancestors lived through and struggled with, and to really put the whole lineage into the context of an honoring. And I think that enables you to be at perfect peace with your.
That is an aspirational state.
Mm.
I'm not there.
None of us are there, but it's my teacher, Patrick Connor, says everything can be healed. And
Yeah.
I have seen over and over miraculous moments of liberation and profound uh, healing. And I do know that it is possible to lower the level of fear you walk with, to lower the level of shame you walk with, to lower the level of grief and hurt you carry. All of those things are not only possible, those are immediate.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And the word grace is a word
Mm,
that I
mm,
love,
wow.
and I try, I'll say I try, I don't always succeed to pour grace into the parts of me that are still a finished draft of who I want to become, but also to extend grace to others when we see the wounded 7-year-old calling the shots for them. And, it is ultimately what is undeserved. It's all undeserved in one sense, but just that force of love too, just really, I mean, there's a lot of dark forces at play, but there's beautiful, high, holy forces that we can tap into. And I think you speak from that place, you bring wisdom from that place, Amy. I feel really, really, my heart is gratitude that I'm in your orbit and I get to you and I get to learn from those you've learned from and the collective, obviously, the village that is all on a path toward that highest, holiest
Yeah.
self in us,
Yeah.
being expressed
That's
in the
beautiful, Margie. I mean, I think the first piece really is where you started us, which is to move from feeling in alienation from or distance from the more tender and vulnerable facets of our own psyche, and to cultivate a base that's strong enough and generous enough and solid enough to host and hold them so that we're in a field of self blessing instead of self distancing. And then the second thing is to have the maturity to know that anything that's in front of you by way of destructive behavior or hard to explain behavior or too strong, disproportionate reactions. Anything that isn't beautiful is trauma. You're looking at defensive, compensatory behaviors that were needed once upon a time. So we have to, all of us, dispel this tendency to judge and assess and constantly be calibrating one another to be a field of unconditional love in which somebody can struggle and can show up as not their highest possibility on any given day, especially now in this turmoil, and be met with understanding and be met with acceptance and be met with care. And the third thing is, I think, um, because the place of work we've been told to leave spirituality out, we miss the chance to share with each other the gorgeous stories of how grace shows up in our lives, of the people and events that come to us as blessings, of the person who goes out of their way to make a unexpected gesture of benevolence and generosity. Like, we don't tell each other stories of awe and wonder, but they are sources of nourishment and encouragement that in a dark time become essential. So I have people on a program go out and make a grace journal and just list for half an hour in a quiet place all the moments where unexpected resource or synchronicity or opportunity or kindness was rained on them, and then to share it with a partner so that we start to let the fabric of an organizational culture breathe with the sense that everybody is always held and there is an implicate order and there is something to have faith in and there is higher intelligence to tap into. And I think all of that is beautiful.
Mm. It is, well, it is the most beautiful. I mean,
Mm,
it is life at its
mm.
richest, it's the gold, it's the marrow of life in that, isn't it? And for those who might be listening to this, who are like, I'm not operating at a high level, I'm not in a big corporate, I would say everything that we have shared relates to every part of our lives. And we
Oh,
can
yeah.
have a grace journal and we can go and share that with those around us and see what just opens up, what new life opens up. And
Yeah, that's a really important point. Leadership in chaos is leadership from anywhere. This love movement can be enacted in a hospital, in a parish, in a neighborhood, in a school.
at the dining table,
100%. I have the privilege once a year to teach for the Acosta Institute, which does healing centered education for New York City school teachers. And to hear the ways they are trying to bring love and healing and racial awareness and collective trauma work into the schools, it touches me tremendously. So I really want to honor that there are people in all facets of life in many different divergent roles and in lots of different parts of a company that already walk this, that already embody this, that are listening to us. And I hope feeling tremendously confirmed in the cultural radicality that they're already enacting.
Amen. Finish up, Amy. I'm compelled to ask you, if you think about what courage looks like for people today, and I know it can look like many things, but one small brave thing that we can all do that can help us to wake up more to the gifts within us and the goodness within us, but also to heal those wounds. What bit of wisdom would you have to share to help people walk that brave path?
I'll answer the question, but only if you join me in an answer afterwards, because you wrote the book on courage. So they should hear us both. I would say go to a place where people are living a life very different than your own. Maybe that's the next neighborhood. Maybe that requires some international travel. Maybe that means you have to walk down the hall and find somebody who was raised in a very different cultural context and ask a deeply sincere question about their lives and let it move you. And I think if we start to learn to be fascinated by the nuance and dimensionality of one another's life walk, we'll start to harvest the collective wisdom that lives in those stories.
That's beautiful. Well, mine, didn't I didn't ask that question with an answer for myself. So now I know what it's like to be put on
Oh,
this. Thank you for doing that.
mm.
I think it's to just find somewhere near nature, ideally, and to just sit still, free of your devices, and just sit and give yourself space to connect with yourself that you so often don't connect with amid the busyness of life. Notice just what comes up for you and actually take a paper and pen and just write, just start with, I want to forgive myself for, and see everything that just pours onto the page. Just where are you making yourself wrong for choices you did or didn't make, did or didn't do? And just to forgive ourselves, to pour a little love into the parts of us that we hold in the wrong or regrets. Um, because I think it's from that place it also helps us to extend more grace and forgiveness for others, for them being the unfinished draft of who they can become. And I think we're all on a journey. And I know we can so often suffer so much because we think we should be further along or we think we should be someone different. And we're all on our path, but we're all figuring it out. And to your point, to make perfect peace it is a long walk.
It's an absolutely gorgeous invitation. And I love the movement of self reconciliation and self forgiveness. I also love, and I just want to highlight the impulse to stop and slow down. In Kabbalah, they talk about how scripture has a certain level of wisdom in the letters on the page and another level of wisdom in the white that's behind the letters, the space between the letters. And I think this is a time where we have to seek deep spaciousness and equanimity and peace in order to be the space between the letters in a very busy world.
Yeah, I know myself, Amy.
Me
Sitting
too.
still
Me
is
too.
not where I'm at my most comfortable. Hence why I said that. Maybe it's because I need to go and
Fantastic.
do that again. Anyway,
Yeah. Thank you
well,
for the
Amy,
reminder. Mm.
thank you so much for being with me. It has been an absolute gift, and I know this conversation will be a gift to others too. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Amy, but more so, I hope that it inspires you to live that little bit braver, to look within yourself to those places that maybe you're holding on to some hurt, maybe you're holding on to resentment, maybe there's something that you need to forgive yourself for. And if so, go sit under a tree with a paper and pen and write yourself a letter. And hey, if it helps, let me know. Thank you for taking the time also to rate and review this podcast. It really helps, and I would greatly appreciate you doing that for me now. Take care, and I'll be back next month with another episode of the Live Brave podcast.